Greetings, family. Welcome to the African Esquire Show on WCC TV. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. Today, I wanted to have a quick conversation. Hopefully, it'll be quick, but basically about a question that I saw floating around on the internet. The question was whether Africa should pay reparations to so-called African Americans. The reason and justification why is because, according to people who were saying this, Africa participated in the transatlantic slave trade just like the Europeans did. Therefore, and not just that, but also today there are a number of tourist sites that a lot of people visit that are basically from the transatlantic slave trade, such as the slave castles and whatnot. So therefore, Africa should have to pay reparations to people who are actually descended from that slave trade. Let's be very clear, that would not, if that were the case, it would not just pertain to so-called African Americans. It would also pertain to people throughout the Caribbean, people throughout Latin America, because all of them all took that boat ride. Not took that boat ride, but were forced onto that boat to basically be sent away to slavery. So it would not be something exclusive to us if that were the case. But I want to investigate that, obviously, first starting from the stance of explaining for many people who already know my personal stance as far as the reparations issue, and I'll get more into that in the end of it. But my personal stance is that you don't ask for reparations when you're not in a position of power, meaning whenever you are still enslaved, whenever you're still incarcerated, whenever you're still being oppressed, you have to understand that you don't get things like repair from the system unless the system has to do something. And the only way that the system has to do something is if you force them to do something. Freedom is not given to you. Freedom is always going to be forced. It's always going to be dealt with in a way that is going to basically have to be fought for. It's not going to be given to you. And if there's any lesson that we should have learned by now, it's that anything that the government's willing to do without being forced to do so is basically just surface level reforms that are not actually meant to uplift us out of the condition that we're in. So if you want to really repair yourself, and that's the whole point of reparations, right? You want to repair our people. We want to go to a position where we're no longer enslaved, not just physically, but mentally. Then that requires a level of power. And that's the only way that you're going to be able to force your oppressor to basically back off of you and also to give back to you what you're owed, right? Germany would have never given reparations, especially the amount of reparations that they've given to European Jews, had they not been forced by that system to do so. They were forced through war, they were forced through trials, and basically the victors were able to force them to do this, and they're still paying that off to this day, okay? Now, when we're talking about the context of Africa, the thing that we have to keep in mind is that, number one, the countries of Africa that exist today did not exist at the time of the transatlantic slave trade. That's a very important point to understand. The borders that are drawn today were not drawn by Africans. They were drawn by Europeans. Because those borders were drawn by Europeans, they intentionally separated many tribes. They intentionally pushed some tribes into these borders that, even though those tribes were conflicting tribes or they might have had issues with one another, they've intentionally just drew these archaic borders that were going to basically represent the colony, and this colony became an independent country. So, for example, you have Nigeria, you have Ghana. All of these countries have multiple tribes in them. It's not just one or two tribes. Some of them have a lot of tribes inside of them. The reason why that's very important to understand, because if you understand what the transatlantic slave trade was, yes, there were African tribes who participated in the capturing of Africans and selling them to European slave traders. But many of those tribes are inside of the same nation today. The ones who were the victims and the ones who were the perpetrators are inside of the same nations today. So you can't just say, I'm going to, let's say, go to Nigeria and say, hey, we demand reparations from Nigeria. Well, guess what? The Igbo were known to have traded Africans. They also were known to have been enslaved. We'll talk about that later. Many of us have Igbo blood. The Yoruba was one of the most targeted tribes. They're all inside of the same nation. So how are you going to basically demand reparations from those who are also victimized? So, and I hope you understand the biggest thing that I think people miss is that whenever Africans were abducted and taken away from their tribes, that also caused a big harm to the tribe. So those tribes that were targeted, like the Yoruba, for example, they were left very weak. Imagine like going through your community and let's say half of those people are just no longer there. That's what those tribes went through. So when it came to having like infrastructure, came to having a system to live by, they were completely flattened by the slave trade all over Africa. Africa lost hundreds of millions of people. I believe hundreds of millions. That's always contested, but they've definitely lost tens of millions of people to the transatlantic slave trade. So we should understand that it's the feelings are going to be widespread as far as who was affected by the slave trade. It's not just those who were taken on the ships; it was those who were also left behind. So we talked about the fact that the nations did not exist. The reason why that's important to understand is because we understand that when it comes to our ethnicity, if you've taken a DNA test, you know that your ethnicity should show up as being from different tribes. You being from a certain tribe does not mean that your tribe that you're from did not also participate in the slave trade. So when you're talking about holding the people who should be held responsible for the slave trade responsible, you would have to hold the tribes responsible, not the countries, right? But if you are going to hold an Igbo tribe responsible, yet you yourself have Igbo inside of you, or that's a big part of your DNA, then who are you basically going to seek reparations against yourself? Now you might say, hey, maybe I'm Igbo, maybe I'm Ashanti, but I'm not the one who got the benefits from that because I was taken. Well, then you'd have to understand that after the slave trade, essentially the Africans who basically dealt with the Europeans, they were making a deal with the devil. And when someone makes a deal with the devil, when someone makes a deal with Lucifer, the issue is that they're going to trade something thinking that they're going to get something better, not understanding the devil always has a long-term plan in mind. The Europeans did not ever expect to stop at those who they were buying. The slave trade only grew and grew and grew and grew. So it started off with a small amount of people that were the targets. But soon the Europeans, their demands got higher. We need more. We need more. The many tribes, they started trying to supply more, supply more. Eventually, some of those tribes basically became a part of the people who were taken. So many of us have the blood of people who were also slave traders inside of us. That's something you should understand. So you have the slave trade growing. And then at some point, the slave trade actually leads to the next step, the colonization of Africa. That's a very important point to understand because any type of benefit that you can maybe say that, you know, Africans got or different tribes might have gotten from the slave trade, good luck tracking that benefit because European colonization came after the slave trade and wiped away those same benefits because now those who were left behind also became enslaved. They also became enslaved inside of their own country. So we have to be very clear what we're saying. When we're talking about reparations from a European power structure, right? If that's what your focus is, if that's what you believe in, you're talking about the people who have benefits that can exist to today. You can actually trace the benefits of the American Empire, of Belgium, of the Portuguese. You can trace those benefits because so much of their riches are still in existence. So much of the infrastructure that existed at that time actually still exists today. There's many companies in the United States that you can trace that have people that actually were enslaved as their labor force that are in existence today and are doing very well. There's banks that have that same story. Universities, right? I believe Harvard is one, for example. You can't trace that same thing happening inside of Africa because right after, again, the slave trade, then comes in European colonization. And colonization said, not only are we going to take the benefits that you might have gotten, we're going to subject you and you're going to become our slave. Many of our people in Africa are not in control of their own land, not in control of their own resources. So to basically give you what your so-called reparations claim looks like, essentially, you are in America, let's say, And although we struggle, let's be very clear, we struggle from police violence, we struggle from just a violent system. I think that's the biggest thing we struggle from in a physical sense. And then, of course, there's a psychological sense. The psychological messaging that comes from the television, comes from being inside of a police state. We suffer in so many ways in America, right? But if we're talking strictly economically, right? Let's say you make I think minimum wage is 750, and so it might be more now. Should be more now, right? But let's say you make 750 an hour, right? Working at some fast food restaurant. And you say, you know what? I want reparations from, let's say, the Igbo tribe or the Ashanti tribe. And you're going to go to Africa, right? And you're going to make this claim. And you come across someone who might be from that tribe, and you who making $7 an hour, 750 an hour, are going to ask someone many times who might be making, let's just be generous, let's say $7 a day for reparations for something that happened before they even were alive, something that happened that they did not understand or benefit from, something that anyone who in their past might have benefited from. Basically, it was taken from them. And those people are not in a better position because of that act, because again, the colonizer came back for more, as is always the case with the deal with the devil. He'll always come back for more. And you're going to ask them for reparations. I want to ask you again, why are you asking for reparations? Are you asking for reparations basically because you want to make people feel the pain that you feel? Or are you trying to ask for reparations because you want to become whole? Because any type of sincere effort to get reparations because you want to become whole is looking at can I do to leverage this situation so that I can be a whole person and not a half person. Now, let's be very clear. Of course, there are rich Africans. There are some Africans that are millionaires. Obviously, there's some who are doing very well. Understand that percentage-wise, it's very, very, very few. And also, particularly in comparison to us in the States, even less. So you might see a billionaire or a millionaire. They did not get those riches from the transatlantic slave trade. I promise you, they got those riches from being inside of cahoots or being in a relationship to the colonial state. So that's important to understand if you're trying to talk about repair, because there are things that I think we can actually state very clearly as far as what we think should happen as far as repair. Like, for example, should Africans in America, whenever we want to go back to the continent, should we be struggling to get citizenship, or should we be given citizenship just because of the fact that we come from the continent and we did not leave on our own accord? I would say the latter. When we go back, should we also have an opportunity to partake in the land? Absolutely. Now let's understand the land is not controlled by the people. Many times they are controlled by the tribes, but even those same tribes do not just give out land like they used to prior to colonialism. Prior to colonialism, the land was controlled collectively. Now it's basically a colonial relationship between the tribe and the state, where the tribe heads are the ones who control it, not the people. So the people, you can be a people who is from one of these many tribes. You could be, Igbo or a different person from a different tribe, and have absolutely no claim to the lands that are owned by the chiefs. So it's basically become a situation where a few people are controlling instead of the many. But absolutely, do I think that we should be given the ability to get land, and also as well, should we be given ability to live, to live in a way of dignity? Absolutely. There are things that should be done if you're going to make that trip back to Africa. Now, if you're making that trip to stay in, if you're basically making a determination to stay in America and make these demands, I say good luck. And not just good luck getting it from countries or from people who are suffering more economically, but good luck getting it from the government while you're so busy asking people who don't have it for it. Good luck getting it from the white oppressor who would very much love for you to have your focus deterred from just him. He would love you to have your focus more also on your brothers and your sisters who also suffered under colonialism. He would love that. You're basically doing what he wants you to do. Just another observation about this is that I noticed that a lot of people who say these things are also the same people who say that we are Native Americans, that basically we're not Africans. And I just say that be clear. If you're saying that we came from Africa and that we're owed reparations from Africa, then you're saying that we're African. Now, if you're saying that we were never sold from Africa, that's a whole nother thing. And, I would also question who you're getting your sources from, and why you're so quick to believe something, despite the fact that we have so much evidence to the contrary. But I mean, ultimately, we all believe what we want to believe at the end of the day. Now, I want to just go through just a quick story, very quick story, just to demonstrate how the people who were participating in the slave trade were not really the people who got to win out in the end. So I'm going to talk first about the Ashanti Empire. The Ashanti Empire, which is really it's not just one tribe, but a number of tribes joined together. The empire participated in the slave trade, right? But as this article says, the consequence of this trade for the Ashanti and their neighbors was horrendous. From 1790 to 1896, the Ashanti Empire was in a perpetual state of war, involving expansion of its defense in its domain. Most of these wars afforded the opportunity to acquire more slaves for trade. The constant warfare also weakened the empire against the British, who eventually became their main adversary. Between 1823 and 1873, the Ashanti Empire resisted British encroachment on their territory. By 1874, however, British forces successfully invaded the empire and briefly captured Kumasi. The Ashanti rebelled against British rule and the British Empire, and was again conquered in 1896. Yet after another uprising in 1900, the British deposed and exiled Ashantihin and annexed the empire into their Gold Coast colony in 1902. So that shows you right there. This is a tribe that is known to have participated in the slave trade, lost everything, became annexed in a part of a colony of Britain called the Gold Coast. Something also, by the way, is that if you don't know, Harriet Tubman was Ashanti. She basically said one of her grandparents told her that she was Ashanti, that basically that's where they come from. And of course, Africans, we live by oral tradition, right? So if you're going to look for reparations, I mean, just imagine how do you even figure out who you're going to go against if you're going to other Africans? I mean, is anyone that has an affiliation with the tribe, anyone that's descended from the tribe, no matter what happened afterwards? I mean, that's something you have to ask. I also want to talk very briefly about Kojo Lewis. If you don't know, and this is why I don't understand how some of you really believe that, although we know that Africans came to the Americas before the Europeans, the idea that you are not African, none of y'all are African, despite the fact we have places like Africa Town, look it up, down south, from the last slave ships that had brought people here, despite the fact that we have testimonies from people who actually lived in Africa before being transported to America. Despite that fact, you still want to believe that you're not African? Okay, well, again, you believe what you want. But Kojo Lewis, he was one of those people of Africa Town. He actually was born in Africa, brought to the Americas right when slavery had ended when he was brought. So when the ship was actually found, they basically released these people, these Africans, and they started their own town. It's called Africa Town. Again, look it up. It's a historic town that still exists down south. And Mr. Lewis, he was of the Yoruba people, and lived in the Bante region, which is now Benin. So Yoruba people also participated in the slave trade. So this is a man right here that ended up being a victim of the slave trade, despite the fact that in Yorubas were very targeted. But despite the fact that he's from one of the ones who were targeted, he also descends from the ones who participated. So I'm bringing this up just to get you to see that sometimes we're chasing arguments, or sometimes we're chasing things that are not going to get us to liberation. And that's ultimately should be the goal, I think. Whether or not you're focused on what you want to do here in America, or whether you're focused on repatriation, liberation should be the common factor, right? It should be about freedom. And if you're talking about freedom, if you believe reparations will get you freedom, I would argue against that. But if you believe that will get you freedom, then I would think that you would want to aim your gun at the highest power that has not just done these things, done the evil. And we all know all of this was evil, right? But not just done the evil, but that actually still controls the wealth. Instead of aiming at the ones, also thinking you have time to aim at the ones who don't control the wealth and the ones who don't control your future, the ones who don't control your destiny. You're going to aim at both at the same time, despite the fact that our people weren't even organized to get one put in a hot seat for long enough. That's divided attention. And that's another way that, assuming, if this is what you're really serious about, it's another way for you to lose out on your ultimate goal. But anyways, that's really the ultimate point I wanted to drive home. And about reparations, repair. That's the central thing that we should focus on, repair. What has to happen for us to repair ourselves? What has to happen for us to be free? What has to happen? And if the certain things aren't going to get you to that, then I suggest that you stop listening to those people who try to take you there. Many times those people are focused on using you for clout, using you for basically their own notoriety, losing you for their own financial benefit, so that you believe there are things that get you all emotional without actually reaping any benefits from what they're saying. Many people in our community have been doing the hustle for a long time, so I don't have to say who, what, when, or how, but you should understand that there are things that you can do to move forward, and then there's things that you can do to be stagnant. And a lot of times what the solutions are that are thrown at you, they promote stagnation. So that's all I have to say on this. I'm sure the comments could be fire. We'll see. So I'll look forward to that. Reminder, and you'll get the reminder coming up, but do register for the convention, Pan-African Unity or Perish. And also don't forget to join my Telegram channel. Telegram is the decentralized app. So anytime that I post a video, I will post it inside of the app so that you get the notification there. That's all. I will see you on the next video.
I think what we are suffering from is ideological confusion. That is, that we're not clear, we're not thinking clearly, and that we need a context within which to answer the question, is something good or bad? We assume that we have the same goals, but we never say what they are. It's time for us to think and articulate and establish our goals as Black nationalists and Pan-Africanists. We need vision, we need clarity. Otherwise, we can't answer the question, is it good for African people? Nationalist goal is self-determination. In the spirit of Delaney, Garvey, Malcolm, Amos, it is Pan-African commitment, that is the unity of African people worldwide and one Africa on the continent as a basis for African strength. So we are about building a Pan-African world order based on the principles of Ma'at, not in imitation of a European order. Ma'at as justice and truth. We need a nation concept, as Dr. Clark told us. A Black economic program, a cultural program, an independent political organization, independent Black media, independent African-centered education financed by us and controlled by us. All of this presupposes, very importantly, an African Black identity.